perhaps I can ask you, Anna Maria, Marilik, and Anne to join here. It is a small group, so if you come a little bit closer to us, maybe we don't feel alone. So, but anyway, a very warm welcome to everybody. Thank you for joining us for this side event of the Bonn Climate Conference. I'm Romano De Vivo. I'm leading sustainability at CropLife International. I spent the last 20 years implementing sustainable agriculture projects around the world, both for the private and the public sector. And I'm really delighted to be here today for this event dedicated to accelerating vulnerability-based adaptation and mitigation through multi-stakeholder platforms. We know, we have heard it in several different events this week, that climate change and extreme weather are already impacting billion people, destroying crops, eroding coastlines, threatening fresh water supply, and clearly food production is also affected and at risk. And we want to make sure that through the help of a number of experts today and that are representing leading organizations, we want to understand which are the concrete examples of multi-stakeholder platforms that we can leverage in really speeding up adaptation. And we have basically two questions. So, which are the concrete examples on the acceleration of vulnerability-based adaptation and mitigation through multi-stakeholder platforms? So, the opportunities, the current initiatives, but also the barriers. So, what is not working in these multi-stakeholder platforms today? And how we can make agriculture more climate resilient through a number of contributions to the transformation of the food systems. And clearly, what is the role that the different stakeholders are playing? What is the role of policy? What is the role of technologies? What is the central role of farmers in all these? And if there is a possibility also to leverage common protocols, because probably in every single room, even today, we are all discussing solutions that are probably not matching and maybe are not cascaded even in the national action plans for food security, for climate, for biodiversity. And clearly, we need to find a way to bring all these contributions together. So, we have a very rich and diverse group today. First of all, we have our keynote, Giulia Di Tommaso, that is President and CEO of CropLife International. And then we have some panelists here with us in the room. We have Anna Maria Lobo Guerrero, Director Climate Action at CGIAR and the Alliance Biodiversity SEAT. Then we have Marilik Niemeyer, Policy Officer of Clim-Eat. And we have Anne Vogue, Senior Advisor for Climate Change of the Bureau for Resilience of USAID. And we have some additional experts and panelists connected from remote. We have James Smith, Director Natural Climate Solutions of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. We have Professor Gilson Martins from the Federal University of Paraná in Brazil. And Robert McDonald, that is the lead scientist of nature-based solutions at the Nature Conservancy. So, first of all, thanks a lot for the availability and for your contribution to this event. So, without further delay, I would like to ask Giulia to take the floor.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Romano. Thanks. I'm really delighted to join you today at this conference. I wanted to echo Romano's thanks. Welcome our panelists here and our virtual gentlemen. And a great panel I think, would be a very engaging, definitely rewarding discussion today. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from all of you and also sharing our perspective on what we can do together by working through a multi-stakeholders collaboration partnership approach to address the global challenges that we are all facing, climate change, but also zero hunger and natural positive. The current situation, the rising effects daily of climate change, the biodiversity loss, but also the effects of the pandemic and the tragic war in Ukraine are reminding us every day that our food systems is very fragile. But at the same time, I think reaffirmed in all our minds the importance of having agriculture and innovation at the center stage of our debates. This is an important belief that aligns with our own purpose and vision at CropLife International, as we want to advance innovation in agriculture for a sustainable future and working with the other stakeholders all together. We can play together a leading role in enabling sustainable food systems transformation. Really looking forward to work to support many of you in this group that they are championing the role of sustainable innovation in agriculture and also looking how we can play together, as I said, a role and looking how innovation and technology can address the paradox that we are facing today, how we can produce better and more nutritious food for a growing population within the planetary boundaries. Our view on innovation in agriculture is that it goes beyond R&D and specific technologies. It's also about social innovation. It's also about how we collaborate together. It's also how we approach strategic partnership and new ideas generations. Our members are among the world's largest R&D agriculture companies, and they are fully committed to look into how we can increase and advance innovation through collaborations and partners with stakeholders. The IPCC report, the recent one, highlights the urgency to act on these fronts, and if we fail to act and adapt now, as we know, we also know that the reality of the challenges and the opportunity are too complex and too big to be met by one organization or one company alone. And this is why it's so important that conversations like the one today are taking place. Globally, but also regionally, we believe that we must work together to accelerate the actions that we know that can deliver sustainable solutions on the ground, local solutions for global challenges, and how we can move faster towards this big challenge of also address not only the future of the well-being of millions of people, but also the future of the next generation. At CropLife International, we are putting partnership and collaboration at the center of our strategy. It's about being open for us, very important to engage and listen, and also that's why also we wanted to put a collaboration and partnership at the center of our strategy to address these global challenges, but also to address how we go about other important topics so intertwined with the climate agenda, such as the respect and the promotion of human rights. So I truly believe that capitalizing with the knowledge and also the tenacity of all this group, we can drive the fundamental changes, not only for us, for the next generation. And you will be pleased to know that I remain an impatient optimist. So thank you very much, and I will hand you over to a very, very rich expert panel, and I look forward to our discussions today.
Thanks a lot, Julia, for sharing the perspective of the private sector and also the openness of the private sector, because this is clearly an important element talking about multi-stakeholder platforms. And clearly, because Julia was sharing with us these concepts of collaboration, of partnerships that are important value at CropLife International, I think we should start to pose the first question to the representative of an organization that has really collaboration and international development at center, at the core of their activity. This is clearly USAID, and Anne from USAID does a lot of work with vulnerable populations, smallholder farmers, indigenous people, and all the communities that have difficulties today in adapting their practices and to a changed climate. So, Anne, how do USAID really mobilize all these stakeholders in all these different situations and with this need, the urgent need of adaptation?
Great. Well, thanks so much for the invitation to be here. It's really great to chat with you all and be with virtual and in real life participants to chat about a really important topic, because we're not going to get to some of the goals, be it SDGs, especially with the climate impacts and all of the kind of terrifying data points out of the IPCC report that says it's getting harder to feed our families in a warming planet. And that's especially true for developing countries and farmers, smallholder farmers, including female-headed households and female farmers. So we do have to be creative, stretch our brain, and partner more now than ever. So I think at AID, we've had the U.S. Agency for International Development, we have sort of a base of having to work with populations, be they cooperatives, governments are always obviously important partners. But I think something that you just said got me excited to show off a little bit. We have 2 new strategies that we've put out that is embedding in what we're doing, making sure that we have strong partnerships and that have people at the heart of what we're doing. So we have a climate strategy that we just released on Earth Day that has a target of helping 500,000 people become more climate resilient. And how we've planned through that is a lot of that's going to have to be through agriculture and making families better able to produce or both fish through fisheries and farming more in a warming planet. And then we also have our global food security strategy that was a refresh a couple months ago, a little bit earlier than our climate change strategy, but it also focuses on and includes a new component on adaptation and resilience, or adaptation and mitigation, and specifically calls that out and recognizes that we need to work across different sectors. I want to share one really fun example of some of the work that we're doing and building off of existing parts of our DNA and the need to partner. So my bureau helps sort of lead the charge for USAID and the U.S. government on Feed the Future, which is the U.S. government's sort of signature food security and poverty alleviation program. And we have something called innovation labs. There's a lot of things like innovation labs or new innovation hubs. Well, our innovation labs are partnerships between U.S. universities with deep knowledge about agriculture and have been around often for decades or more. That partner with developing country universities or organizations and work with governments, work with smallholder organizations, importantly the private sector and the developing world, to make sure that we're leveraging technologies and partnerships that are being created out of these collaborations. So at COP26, we announced, under the umbrella of the Agricultural Innovation Mission for Climate, some investments in one of these innovation labs. It's based out of Penn State, and it's called Innovation Lab for Emerging Threats for Agriculture. And they are, one of the things that I love about them is they work on something called Plant Village. And they've got Plant Village as a name of a platform, and that brings together people from all over the world with different expertise. So you've got everyone from NASA to ISAMBA to Kenya Meteorological Association to the really cool part, in my slightly biased opinion, is to groups of young people called the Dream Team who go out and using their smartphones or taking pictures of what's a pests or leaves that are rotting, and you're seeing different types of rust, and clicking, taking a picture, uploading that. And what Plant Village has done, and through some of this innovation lab work, are using artificial intelligence to be able to quickly sort of diagnose what the problem is, be able to share that information back down, not just to the farmer, but to your ag extension folks, your Ministry of Ag, and blast out over text messages and what have you. Hey, how do you address this? How do we stop this locust from moving further along, and just responding appropriately to the threat? And you can't do that without a whole host of different partners across a huge collaboration, but you really need everyone from on the ground all the way up into space, not to be too cheesy, but you need your satellite data and be able to translate that well so that people can actually use that. So I think one of the things that we've been really advocating for is user-centered or people-centered approaches to how we do these types of technologies and interventions to make sure we're really helping people. I'm going to say one last thing and then we'll stop, because for when we talk about climate-smart ag and adaptation, women have often been left out, I think, of the equation, and a lot of climate-smart agricultural interventions sometimes cause more work for women. And if you've ever talked to a smallholder farmer, they already have enough work on their plate. So how we develop, deploy, and work on these different technologies is to make sure we're talking to and co-creating as much as possible with the end user, so that we're not causing more work for folks that are facing a lot of challenges with a warming world. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Anne. I mean, there are a lot of incredible things in what you were sharing. Thanks for that. But I'm picking up perhaps on two critical elements. So you are telling us that perhaps digital is one important component of whatever adaptation plan we have, but also that digital is not just about the technicalities of agricultural adaptation, but perhaps is also an element to take better in consideration diversity. I have a final question for you, Ando, because I know that you have an hard stop in 10 minutes. So you also have another hat. So you work with Aim for Climate, which is a big multi-stakeholder platform. And can you please explain, really in few elements, how the mutual support between different stakeholders work in this multi-stakeholder platform?
Yeah, thanks for that. And I think, so Aim for C is the agricultural innovation mission for climate. And it's probably if you looked in a dictionary what multi-stakeholder is, I think you'd have Aim for C right next to it, because it's been a pretty exciting effort. It was launched at COP26. It's a joint initiative from the US and the UAE to try to marshal stakeholders from across the governments and non-governmental sectors in the private sector to commit to increasing support for research and development and innovation for climate-smart food systems. And I don't need to tell this crowd why that's important to do. I mean, this is how we're going to be able to feed a growing population in a warming world if we need to be able to invest in the type of research and development and innovation that can help farmers feed themselves and grow more food sustainably. And why I think Aim for C is pretty unique in we've got over 40 government partners. So there's 3 different types of partners. You can sign up as a government partner. And again, there's over 40 now across the developing and developed world. You can be an Innovation Sprint partner, and thanks to you all for signing on as an Innovation Sprint partner, and I'd urge folks to check out the website for a bit more details. But this is if you're an Innovation Sprint partner, you're a private sector or non-governmental actor that commits to increasing resources towards research and development and innovation. And last but not least, we have knowledge partners, which we have over 200, which is of sort of folks all dedicated to the same effort to try to increase our investments in climate-smart food systems. And the knowledge sharing that I think we've already had has been pretty impressive. there aren't a lot of kind of good interactive websites, and I would really just urge folks to check out aimforclimate.org, I believe, where there's updates on both the calendar, but also on the partnerships. And we're holding different types of webinars. We call them ideation sessions, where you can come together and collaborate on things. We're hosting one on food loss and waste in another couple weeks. There's been ones on working with smallholder farmers in developing countries, all to help share information and learning and try to match together folks working on these important issues. What I think is interesting from the government side, from the partners' perspective, we also have a lot of learning between chief scientists. We'll meet together from each government to try to learn from each other, share information, including from developed countries to developed countries, which is really important. So it's a really strong platform for trying to address this challenge that we're facing in the food systems because of climate change. And I think provides a space and opportunity for people to work through some of the problems that we're facing across all aspects of the food system. So just urge folks to check it out. Thank you. And
Thanks a lot.
And I apologize, I do have to leave shortly, but I'm looking forward to the discussions, but sorry when I sneak away. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for your participation. And so we heard from USAID about their strategy to accelerating really agricultural investment in innovation. And this is bringing us to the analysis of another multi-stakeholder platform that brings together more than 200 partners, united in an initiative to identify and accelerate food system transformation pathways, led by CGIAR, and Anna Maria is one of the strong leaders of CGIAR in climate action. And I would like to ask you, Anna Maria, to tell us about the initiative that is really touching on several very important issues, starting from poverty to climate change, to food and nutritional security, and clearly focusing mainly on smallholder farming communities.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation to be here. Very, very happy and excited to, thank you, to be part of this conversation. And thank you, Julia, for being so positive. That's really good. I think that we need that. We really, we need that because we are facing a very challenging effort. So this was something that started some years ago through this cross-cutting research program of the CGIAR, CCAFs, in terms of really thinking about if we are serious about achieving the Sustainable Development Goals in relation to food by 2030, then we need to understand how to reconfigure food systems. So food systems, the way that they are behaving right now, it's not going to bring us there. And even though we have been improving in many indicators, we have not been improving these indicators fast enough if we have a target of 2030 in terms of SDGs. So we got together with a lot of partners from the government, from the private sector, from research, brainstorming which were the key areas to trigger to promote this transformation. And at the heart of this was very much in terms of partnerships and the importance of strong partnerships. And Julia mentioned something in relation to innovation, because innovation was also part of this initiative. And a little bit what was behind that was what you mentioned, which is not only thinking about technologies, but social innovation. And how do we bundle these technologies that are helping farmers to be prepared when droughts, floods come, but how do we bundle these, or we put together these technologies with the right environment, the enable environment, so that these farmers can benefit from these technologies? Because otherwise, that's not going to be possible. And this is where social innovation, partnerships, collaboration, it's really important to include into this equation. And perhaps something that we have learned, and Romano, or somebody, you mentioned that also what has not worked. And I think that we need to learn a lot from things that have not worked in the past. because otherwise we're going to continue doing the same mistakes and we are not going to get anywhere. So, so in relation to climate information, which is something fundamental to work with farmers so that they can be prepared when these extremes come. We have seen throughout the years a lot of progress in relation to providing the right climate information, the right agroclimatic forecasts that can tell us what's going to happen in the following 6 months in relation to temperature, rainfall. And the models are there. We can always do more, we can improve, but the models are there. The big challenge is that in many cases and in many countries, farmers are not really using this information to make decisions. Simple decisions as to when to plant, when to apply the water, which varieties to use. So even though the climate information is there, we are not seeing any impact of that climate information because farmers are not using this. So, so given that, we started to think, how can we promote a change in terms of this? Because we believe that climate information is fundamental for adaptation purposes. And this is a really nice initiative, which I would say that, and I think that it's one of the successful cases that I have seen coming from research. And I think that there are 4 dimensions that are really important that help us to achieve what we were able to achieve. So the first one, this started as a South-South collaboration. And I want to emphasize that many times we believe that the developed world, the global north, needs to bring the technologies into the South. In many cases, that's not the case. And I'm coming from Colombia. In many cases, we do have the things that we know that work. And by communicating among peers and farmers to farmers, we make a huge difference. So I believe that South-South collaboration was key in terms of this experience. The second dimension was the necessity to empower farmers. Again, a lot of our projects are just like going into communities and saying, you know, you should be doing X, Y, and Z. And then the farmers are passive agents that are just like receiving this information. And we are hoping that with that, we're going to generate a long-lasting change. It never happens. So the importance of empowering farmers. The importance of powerful partnerships, and that was mentioned already, key, and the importance of, through this work, being able to influence policy, thinking about scale. And basically what we did was that we have been working in Senegal, in Kaffrine, in terms of putting climate information in the hands of farmers for making better decisions. And then we used as example that case to bring that knowledge first to Colombia and Honduras. So we brought the farmers that were using the climate information, the agroclimatic forecasts, we brought them to Colombia, and it started a huge thing in terms of Colombians saying, you know, if Kaffrine, which has all these challenges in terms of temperature, if they can do it, we can do it as well. So started working with research, with the government in order to make it work. And the idea was so simple, and sometimes we think about innovation as something that it's really, really hard. Basically, what we do through these multi-stakeholder platforms was to put together 3 communities that in many cases, they don't talk to each other. So we had the climate community in terms of the scientists that were running the climate models. We put together with the agricultural community, the scientists that were running the agronomic models, put them together. But then the third part of this, which was the most important, was we put the farmers into the equation at the same level. So we had these monthly meetings where at the community level, we had these spaces to enable this conversation, this dialogue, and farmers were part of the conversation. They really understood what that climate information was referring to, and they saw that it could be useful. But we didn't stop there, because then we say, you know, we're going to end up as always. So the next step was to translate those forecasts, that climate information, into specific adaptation options, something very clear for the farmers. And the farmers were part of this translation. So very specific adaptation measures that a farmer could implement in the following month. You know, wait a little. Do not harvest right now because the conditions, according to the climate information, you're going to lose. Or you can win more if you wait a little. And it was, so everybody got excited. We started with 2 of these multi-stakeholder platforms in Colombia. And then it started to spread like a virus. Not like the coronavirus, but a good virus. And it was amazing how we started in Colombia. Now in Latin America, we have 10 countries implementing these multi-stakeholder platforms, more than 200 partners that are part of these, and more than 300,000 farmers that are receiving this climate information, not only receiving it, co-generating this climate information, translating it so that their peers can use this information and implementing practices. And then the last part, which I think that was powerful in terms of this, was that in Colombia, we were able, through these early pilots, to include that into the NDC of Colombia with a very clear target of implementing at least 5 of these committees. Then when the NDC was revised, and given that it was so successful, then they increased the target to 30 of those committees, and we're almost close to get to that number as well. So a really interesting case on how these multi-stakeholder platforms can be really, really useful, and it was just like getting people together that usually don't talk. And obviously there was a case in terms of somehow considering local context in terms of the climate information that was being generated, which it's fundamental because otherwise it's not going to be useful. But really interesting case on the powerful of these partnerships and multi-stakeholder platforms. And then let me just finish by linking this to something that we are doing right now in the CGIAR. So based on those lessons learned, we are starting to implement this portfolio of initiatives in the CGIAR. And one of those, it's really dealing with building this systemic resilience against climate variability and extremes. And it's very much, it goes into really understanding the causes of vulnerability. So why, for instance, farmers are not using climate information? Why are they not benefiting from climate information? Because many times from the research side, we start by just like, there's a need of climate information. Let's produce the climate information. We need to go one step before and see why is this climate information not working, not benefiting farmers. So it's really addressing the root causes of why these people are vulnerable, and this implies, as you mentioned, thinking about poverty and how we can help to build this adaptive capacity. And one of the things that we are going to do in this initiative is working with farmers to reduce the risks of agriculture, because that's the other thing. Agriculture is risky, and when you include the climate variable, it becomes riskier. So how do we can reduce those risks? And there's something that is very important in there, and it's combining climate information with digital tools, with an important component of participation of the private sector, so that we can make sure that farmers are being able to be part of this production and information of climate information and use it. And this includes also thinking about insurance, which is another one of our lessons learned that we have failed many times. So insurance is not reaching the farmers that we want to reach. The most vulnerable ones, insurance is not getting there. We have pilots here and there, but it's not scaling, it's not making a significant impact. So how do we think about bundle insurance products, consider, for instance, gender? So why women are not accessing insurance? Let's ask us, why is that? And then once that we understand why, what's the root cause of that, then let's develop an insurance a product that addresses those needs of women so that they can use that. So it's bundling these technologies, which, I mean, we all think that insurance is useful. But why is not reaching the numbers that we try to reach? Why is not benefiting farmers? And then by putting together the enabling environment so that these can be really useful and respond to the needs of the populations that we want to impact, then another story emerges.
Ana Maria, thanks a lot. I mean, but not just for the knowledge, but really for the passion, for the energy that you are putting in your work. And I mean, while you were speaking, I was visualizing you in a field in Colombia, helping farmers really adapt And this is fantastic. Thanks a lot. But you said a lot of very important elements. I mean, you started with social innovation that, I mean, we think, I mean, about innovation as something complex, something that is really always dealing with technologies. In reality, is dealing with farming activities, management practices, and then, I mean, you focus on climate information. So information is key, and we all need. I mean, I don't know if you have noticed what we have here on the microphones. I don't have a button. So, I mean, we all need elements because we all feel lost in many different situations. So a farmer that is facing climate change needs more information. And we cannot imagine that this information is coming from the government, the think tank, the university. It's better if it's coming from the farmer that is farming next door, because it would be more credible, more immediate. And the south-to-south element, I mean, there is an important cultural element there. The fact that we transfer this information also in the national plans is also important. I mean, if tomorrow the national plans or the rules to get a loan for the farming activity are completely different or linked to different criteria, I mean, this is not going to work. And finally, all this translates in adaptation. That means de-risking farming activity. That is what we want. And the risking farming activity is also linked to one important that you mentioned, that is insurance. And this is, I think, a fantastic link to another multi-stakeholder platform that talks about the collaboration of a major development agency, GIZ, the Brazilian government, and the Polytechnic University of Paraná. And I would like to ask Professor Gilson to tell us more about this experience, because it's really central. I mean, how you are de-risking the activity of farmers in Brazil. We cannot hear you.
Hello, thank you, Romano. Thank you all for the insights. It's very interesting talks I had before. And yes, it's a pleasure to be here. So let's talk a little bit about insurance, the role of insurance in some kinds of experiences we have in Brazil. So one important thing to have in mind, I liked what Ms. Ana Maria told before about translating information into useful, or transform data into useful information to the farmers. And I was not actually planning that, but I will start my conversation talking about something we have in Brazil that might be very useful for other Latin American countries, which is the climate zoning. Climate zoning. This is something implemented by the government. And this is something very interesting, because you take climate information from, let's say, 30 years, soil information, the water needs of plants, for example, and you transform that into really, let's say, practical information for the farmers so they can plan their production. And this is very important, because this is the base. This is the base for a bunch of other risk management tools, and one of those tools is actually insurance, crop insurance, and agricultural insurance. Because this is one thing we have to have in mind. Insurance is something in the agricultural field. You buy it, or the farmer buys it, in order to get some protection against climate oscillations. But the thing is, that alone is not enough to protect the farm. You know, Ana Maria told before, you have to have this useful information. So you have to give the farmer useful tools so they can plan. And for example, you might not get a useful or a policy, a insurance policy, if you don't have the basic information. So I would say you have to make sure that the farmer has the capacity of performing all the needed technical operations in order to produce in the right way. Also, must have the basic information and support, advisory services in order to be able to plant in the right season, right periods, and so on. So then you can implement a kind of insurance to protect farmers. And so actually in Brazil, we were able to implement insurance programs. In nowadays, we cover more or less 20% of the Brazilian area, mostly crops. But the very important base is actually this platform for information for the farmers. There is one thing that is very important. I think Ana Maria told about the difficult to implement insurance. I'm not sure if you're talking about your country, but it might be the reality of several other places, not only in Latin America. But I can tell you, I'm very sure about that. You always need the support from state if you want to implement a, let's say, viable insurance program. Right now I am a visiting professor here at the Ohio State University in the USA. So USA has the, let's say, the biggest insurance program in the world. The USDA is spending or spent last year $8.5 billion with subventions for the crop insurance in USA. So if you go to Brazil, we have more or less the same situation. India spends more than $1 billion for subventions and so on. And this is actually a very, very big challenge because we know not many governments have the capacity to invest huge amounts of money for subventions and something like that. And so I would say this is one of the most important challenges the developing countries face nowadays, is to provide the right the money for the insurance, because normally the crop insurance is not always something very cheap, because what we have to bear in mind is that, okay, we are talking about climate change, oscillations in the climate, and the price, for example, of a premium for a policy is a direct consequence of the risk the farmers are facing. And so sometimes, like Ana Maria told, it's very risky, and you have to invest a lot. So that's why in most cases, in the most successful cases in crop insurance, so you have to have this, the government directly put in some kinds of subventions.
Gilson,
well,
may I interrupt on one element? Because you are saying that we need a set of conditions that are very clear before starting then in insurance. So in other terms, we probably need protocols, no, to be very well defined. And I know that in Brazil you have something that is called, I believe, zoning, where you really define, you do a little bit of spatial planning to say which are the crops and which are the practices that fit the different zones. Is this also one element of adaptation in Brazil?
I would say this is one of the most important elements, because you have this agriculture. We call that climate agricultural zoning. Okay, and we have that for more than 40 crops in Brazil, and we say, so when is the most appropriate period for the farmer to plant their seeds, for example? And without that, we are not able, because in Brazil we have two very important, let's say, policies at national level. One is the crop insurance, and the other one is the credit or rural credit. And for accessing those two policies, the farmers have to comply with this agricultural zoning. So this is, in the one hand, a tool to access those policies. On the other hand, those are practical tools to plan the production. So this is very important. We see lots of people from Latin America just coming to Brazil to take a look at that. But for that kind of things, you need an investment. So our national agricultural research center, Embrapa, you guys, some of you might know, that is nowadays the organization behind that kind of planning. So more than 100 researchers are working in that kind of things. You need a huge computational capacity for performing that kinds of things. And so I'm glad you asked that, because this is really the basis for everything, for the implementation of policies in Brazil.
And maybe a final question. You clearly are talking about risk management tools that are applied at farm level. So something that the farmer himself can manage. But I mean, when we face some more catastrophic events, we also need interventions from government. So this is a level that an individual farmer will not be able to handle. Yeah, so true. How the two things, the two levels are working in Brazil?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because that's something I would like to say. So the insurance is able to cover up to a certain level of risks. So we have to bear in mind that this is that normally crop insurance is a private tool, and private agents are actually willing to assume or to support some level of risks. And in general, in countries where you have a very well-developed insurance system, you have this basic level of insurance, and so insurance goes up to a certain level of risks or let's say disasters. From that level above, you need some more action from the government. So it goes to another level, let's say this emergency plans and something like that, disaster plans and something like that. I would say in Brazil, we are still really walking slowly toward a, let's say, broader protection of not only farmers, but it's something not a problem only for farmers, but for even for cities or other places that are facing, let's say, disasters and something like that. But I would say this is a very important platform as well to have this second level. At international level, it's important to point out that we have the Sendai protocol, which is the basis for the implementation of risk management internationally. And before I stop talking, I would like to say that I prepared some, let's say, I just have written some notes on the role of crop insurance, and I just gave it, I sent to you per email, Romano, please feel free to forward that to our colleagues that are here. And if you guys have more interest to discuss that, I'll be very happy to
Thanks a lot,
keep
Gilson.
on talking. Okay.
Thanks a lot. Very much appreciated. And we will try to find a way to make it available, perhaps on the website, so that everybody can have a copy. So I would like to change a little bit the sort of angle from which we are looking at multi-stakeholder platforms. And I would like now to ask James, that represents really one of the broad platforms that are putting together the private sector, with companies that are representing really also different stakeholders in the food systems. And I really would like to ask you, James, to tell us what is the role that the World Business Council plays in all the multi-stakeholder coalitions that you are activating, and particularly, I mean, the ones that are really working on the Food Systems Summit. Food Systems Transformation.
Great, thank you very much for the question, and it's a pleasure to be with everybody here to discuss this important topic, and been fascinated by the discussions we've had so far. So, I mean, the first thing to say is that multi-stakeholder coalitions and platforms are absolutely crucial to the underlying objectives of WBCSD. And for those who do not know WBCSD, WBCSD is the premier community of sustainable businesses around the world. So we have over 200 members, some of the largest multinational corporations, and it's a CEO-led community. So our guidance comes from what the executives need to see in order to accelerate systems transformation towards net zero, nature positive, and a more equitable future. So in terms of thinking about the roles of, or the importance of multi-stakeholder coalitions, as highlighted, they're really the linchpin of our strategy. And that's because we have identified three key imperatives or challenges that we need to get to grips with at the moment, and have already been highlighted by other speakers on the panel. And those are obviously the climate crisis, the nature loss crisis, and then the inequity crisis. And all of these have been made potentially been exacerbated by the COVID-19 crisis, of course, as well. And sadly, I'm very pleased to hear about the optimism that we have in meeting these challenges, but we are sadly off track in meeting them at the moment and moving towards significant tipping points. And so business obviously has a critical importance, a critical role in helping to develop the frameworks and the incentives that we need to put in place if we're to operationalize and reach our ambitions to deliver against climate, nature, and equity crises, and effectively steering a course for a 1.5 degree world. And so it's great to be speaking to you about this today in Bonn, obviously with UNFCCC COP27 on the horizon later this year. This is a fantastic opportunity to really have to mobilize business and to engage with other stakeholders to accelerate action towards these key topics. But really, why is engaging in multi-stakeholder coalitions so critical for WBCSD and our members? And really, I'd highlight that there's no way that we'll be able to accelerate these transformations needed unless we work in partnership. And unless we involve the voices of everyone who is affected by and has some responsibility towards climate and nature and equity crises. Certainly when we think about the food systems, businesses are often working in fairly complex value chains. And they're also often working on fairly wicked problems with interlinked effects of climate, nature, and equity. And so due to this complex nexus of challenges, we really, and the diversity of people who are impacted by these outcomes, we really need to ensure that we're developing holistic solutions and solutions that are delivering against the needs of all of the stakeholders. And so that's why this multi-stakeholder aspect is so critical. And by bringing together different stakeholders to look to solve specific solutions, we can then really look to identify and deliver on outcomes that importantly meet the needs of the various stakeholders. So the needs of individual farmers may be slightly different from those of policy and those from business, but we need to provide a platform where there is a shared understanding and dialogue so that we can generate solutions that come together to meet these various needs. Because there can, in certain cases, be trade-offs, and we need to understand where those trade-offs may lie, and therefore, through this landscape and dialogue and mapping, we can then identify, okay, well, where are the synergies where we can take action? And that's really important, I feel.
Can I jump on what you just said, James? Allow me. Because you are saying clearly dialogue and mutual understanding and trade-offs are critical in these multi-stakeholder platforms that I believe we all agree here. But if I think to a criticism, I mean, I see that, for example, farmers are usually not the standard, let's say, partner of your initiative. So how do you plan to make sure that your efforts that are really fantastic in setting very high-level standards for sustainability and sustainable agriculture in the world, I mean, are also including the critical risk managers and the people that are really exposed also to the transformation we are talking about?
Yeah, no, a really good question, and one I'm very happy to answer. So, I mean, fundamentally, as we already highlighted, you know, farmers and land stewards are central to this discussion, and we need to ensure that their voice is included in these dialogues. And then I think you summarized or paraphrased one of a section earlier highlighting that information is more credible if it comes from another farmer, and I think that's a really important summary point, that, you know, take-home point that we should all keep in front of mind. I think you're right. So what can WBCS do to ensure that we include the voice of farmers? Well, you know, our direct relationship is with our members, some of the largest multinationals active in the food system, but it's through establishing and through partnering in these multi-stakeholder coalitions that we then are able to elevate the voice of the farmers and to communicate and provide a platform where we can ensure that their concerns and needs are discussed at the same level and taken into consideration in developing solutions with policymakers, business, civil society, etc. So obviously we do not directly have any explicit links to farmers as the World Business Council, but we therefore look to specifically target and include the right forms of farmer organizations into our multi-stakeholder dialogues. So, for instance, if I could highlight some examples, we recently set up an initiative called the Soils Investment Hub. And so we're all probably aware in this room of the underlying importance of ensuring we don't degrade soils further, and that we look to maintain and rebuild our soils if we're to feed a growing population and provide food security. So this is, we've put together a coalition which includes our businesses, which are our members, which are involved in the food systems, but also brings together research scientists, farmer associations and farmers, including, for instance, the World Farmers Organization, etc., and then academia and civil society organizations to convene on a regular basis to help them navigate or come together with a shared understanding of the importance to work on soil health issues. And to develop shared solutions to protect and restore soils moving forwards. So, for instance, you know, like I highlighted, the World Food Organization, we work with them very often, which is a bit like WBCSD. Actually, it brings together all of the local and national farming associations around the world, and so by working with them as a partner, as we look to put together key messaging around what needs to be done, to provide tools and solutions that can be implemented on the ground, etc. These can be translated into language and into tools and solutions that can be implemented easily on the ground. So it's through working with these farmer organizations to ensure that what we develop as a multi-stakeholder level and what some of the needs from business in terms of reaching their own net zero commitments can be translated into actions that can that are tangible on the ground, and realistic and align with the needs of local land managers.
Excellent.
Yeah.
No, fantastic, James. It's very nice to see that. I mean, this mechanism are really mechanisms that are putting together peers, because I mean this is really important. And now I want to try again to change a little bit the angle of our analysis, and I want to go to Marilik to understand from a think tank that is leveraging multi-stakeholder platforms and is working with the public and the private sector, is about to host the food system pavilion at COP27, is a partnership with the Egyptian government. I mean, you are really at the center of a number of incredible opportunities to put stakeholders together. So how we are going to leverage this opportunity now also for adaptation and really to rediscover also the centrality of farmers?
Thank you very much, Romano, and it's really a great opportunity to be on this panel with very inspiring speakers. So thank you very much. I think before we have a look at multi-stakeholder platforms and how they can be effective or how we can increase their effectivity, I think we need to ask ourselves first 2 general questions about that we always need to ask if we want to change something and if we really want transformative action. And I think the first question that we need to always ask ourselves is, what is it exactly that we want to change? And I'm saying this because I think too often we have different solutions addressing different problems, but what we need is to come together and really have a common understanding of what is it exactly that we want to change. So we need this defined clearly. And then the second question that we need to ask ourselves is, what do we need to change in our own behavior to facilitate that change? Because if we talk about changing a system, we have to be aware of our own role in that system and how we are upholding this system. So it's really important that we also look at our own behavior. And now if we translate this to multi-stakeholder platforms, I think there's a couple of elements that multi-stakeholder platforms need to address in order to facilitate this systemic change in an effective way. And I think the first element is that the multi-stakeholder platform needs to be mission-oriented. So this really comes back to the first question. It needs to have a clear definition of what is going to be changed, and also with the different stakeholders, making sure that everyone is indeed on the same understanding of this and not talking past each other, but really talking with each other. Then the second element, I think, is meaningful participation. And I think many speakers have already touched upon this, but it's really important that that especially those who are ultimately affected are included in the multi-stakeholder platform. So if we talk about climate change adaptation and a multi-stakeholder platform in this, we need to include farmers, but also the local communities that will be affected by the policies that this multi-stakeholder platform will implement. And then, so it's really important that there is really attention to the circumstances of what the people are in. And then finally, the multi-stakeholder platform needs an element of accountability. It's very important that the different stakeholders are also held to account to the promises that they make and to the activities that they will bring in the multi-stakeholder platform. So I think those are 3 elements for the multi-stakeholder platform, but that is not quite enough, because ultimately the multi-stakeholder platform is only as strong as the stakeholders and the individuals that it represents. So finally, I think we need to look at how can the stakeholders facilitate the systemic change in an effective way. And for this, I think it's really important that the mission that has been committed to in the multi-stakeholder platform is internalized in the whole organization. So what I mean with that is, if you are engaging in a multi-stakeholder platform as a government, for example, it cannot only be your foreign policy or your foreign policy that is addressing this change, but you really have to internalize it. So you cannot only talk about how will our foreign policy address climate change adaptation abroad, but also how will we address that at home. And if you are participating as as an industry, as a business, you cannot only have your CSR department or your public affairs department that is committed to this, but you really have to see this mission that we have in this multi-stakeholder platform. If we really want to address climate change adaptation, how can we change our business model to internalize that and to ensure that our role that we are representing in the system is also fully changed? So I think with those 3 elements and with the true commitment of the stakeholders in the platform, we can organize multi-stakeholder platform in a more effective way and make transformative change. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Marilik. I mean, it's a very profound reflection on some of the structural elements of multi-stakeholder platform. So I think it's very useful, but it's also not so easy to implement. I'm thinking to the first example, you were talking about a government that is implementing an internal policy, implementing solutions to help their own farmers to be able to implement adaptation. But then, I mean, also reflecting this sort of approach in their trade policy to try to import goods that are produced according to the same rules. And suddenly we discover that perhaps the rules and the approaches that were valid in the first countries are completely wrong for the second country. That is the one that is exporting to the first one. So it's very complex. It's a very true metrics that we need to learn how to use. But it's also potentially derailing sometimes people, because you think, I mean, I'm doing everything right at home. I probably want that you are doing exactly the same. And maybe this is not right. And maybe, I mean, what is adaptation for me may be probably the wrong suggestion, the wrong request for you. No? Very good. No, thanks a lot. I mean, all this is bringing us now to the final angle that we have selected for this discussion. And we are going now to an organization that is quite iconic because it's an NGO that is also the major landowner in the United States. And is an NGO that is really focusing on a number of very complex projects. I will mention, Rob, just one. I mean, that I always have in mind as an incredible breakthrough. When the Forest Code was implemented in Brazil, basically TNC was helping farmers to implement the Forest Code, making sure that nurseries were prepared together with local municipalities, with companies, with the financial system, to give the opportunity to replant a large part of the farming land, but also to make sure that the productivity on the remaining land for farmers was compensating the loss of land. And I think, I mean, this sort of philosophy, I believe, Rob, is still very much in many of your projects. And but you are a scientist, and together with the multi-stakeholder platforms that you create outside your organization, I would like to ask you something slightly different. I believe TNC is a fantastic model of internal multi-stakeholder platforms, like a little bit CGIAR. So you have a collaboration between different departments internally that are really able to deep dive on problems, but then to bring them to a unitary protocol. Can you tell us about this?
Yeah, it's hard to go last in this sequence of panelists because there's been some great comments, and I want to echo what many of my colleagues have said, and talk about a different angle, maybe, of multi-stakeholder engagement. So we started in the U.S., as you said, as a land trust, and we've protected about 50 million hectares in the U.S., but we work on agriculture in many, many countries and work in around 70 countries around the world. And so you might put all of our agricultural work under this idea now of regenerative food systems, And we definitely engage in some of the multi-stakeholder platforms that have been discussed here. And then we also work, like that Brazil example you mentioned, Romano, as kind of maybe it's a field extension agent or with partners, farmers in the field, implementing different projects. And one of the challenges we face as we do that, to echo what the last panelist said, is there's not really one agenda, right, of regenerative food systems. There's multiple agendas. So there are projects around water efficiency and water quality, right? So I might highlight, we've some work with Kellogg and Syngenta in Arkansas, helping rice farmers get more efficient in how they apply irrigation water using some automated irrigation equipment. We work in Brazil still in the Cerrado, thinking about limiting expansion of soy through a sustainable soy partnership with many other groups. There's a focus in Kenya and other countries like Mongolia on sustainable grazing, and there's a knowledge network around that, both inside TNC and with other partners. There's a group within TNC and definitely externally thinking about the low carbon agenda for agriculture, right? So things like using no-till or cover crops in India to reduce burning of agricultural residuals, both for carbon benefits and to reduce air pollution. So what is challenging is within TNC, these may be different scientific groups or different groups of practitioners, right, who with different skill sets. And then there are different multi-stakeholder platforms maybe that are advocating for one or other of these agendas. And so I do think one thing that this community, whatever it is called, right, around regenerative agriculture, regenerative food systems, has to figure out is, for a given country or given crop, what do those all add up to, and what's the set of advice we want to give farmers? And maybe I want to end on a second point. We've talked a lot about knowledge here, information, getting information to farmers, and sort of co-developing those tools to share information. And all of that is really important. We have found that when we develop decision support tools, unless you're really co-developing it with the people directly using that tool, they're basically useless, right? And there are definitely cases we've made tools that haven't worked, and there's others that have worked, and all the ones that have worked have been sort of a deep co-development, which takes time. But I just want to emphasize again, maybe it's an obvious point, but it's an important point that we always say information is not even half the work. It's like 10% of the work, right? The rest of the work of driving change in agricultural system is as hard. So to take that example of rice farmers in Arkansas, it's not just enough to talk about the benefits of installing automated irrigation systems. It's more capital intensive, so you have to think about the financial incentives for those farmers, and water is mostly free, right? So you have to think about what are the financial incentives those farmers are responding to, or policy incentives, and how do we change those over time? I think we started to get into that discussion today with our discussion about insurance, which is one strategy TNC works on. There's others, but I do hope these multi-sectoral groups, which are bringing all the right people in the room, we're really all talking to each other, also can start to drive more transformational change in policy and incentives. But honestly, I see that as slow in many countries. And a couple of my panelists have mentioned that we're losing this battle overall of adapting to climate change in the agricultural system. And it's not because of a shortage of information. It's because these other things, policy and incentives, are just changing very slowly.
Thanks a lot, Rob, and hopefully we are not losing the battle. I mean, we are struggling a little bit, definitely, but we are not losing the battle. This is for sure. I would like just to reward now your patience, opening the floor to your questions and curiosity. I mean, you have some of the most astonishing experts that we have on this topic, so just take advantage of it. And if you all have any additional elements that you want to add, it would be nice, Anna Maria, James, Gilson, or Robert to to add your additional comments or statements.
Hi, good morning, and many thanks for the insight, for organizing this event, and was very inspireful. I'm Fabio Niaspola. I work for the Secretariat of the Private Sector Mechanism at the UN Committee on Food Security, and I am here also for one of the members, that is the Global Dairy Platform. So we are following the negotiation and also clearly the work stream on agriculture. And so my question for all the panelists is, what is your suggestion for the continuation of the work on agriculture and how to promote multi-stakeholder partnership more? Because we know that this is a key, I think it's a key tool and it's a key way to make progress. And we had a lot of need to pass from just talk to implementation. So how multi-stakeholder partnership could really help to implement policies needed. And another question probably is more on the synergies that can be done on innovation and how to promote innovation in the different UN conventions, like the biodiversity one and the climate change one. So for example, I see that the word innovation is not really mentioned in the global biodiversity framework that is under discussion, but will be something super strategic also for climate. So how to also work a little bit more in a multi-stakeholder partnership in between the convention to leverage this I think strategic tools.
Thanks a lot. Let's see if we have some other questions so that we bundle them together. Yeah.
Good morning, Kelly Witkowski from the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation in Agriculture, and thanks for these insights, really great. I was struck by the comment of the panelist, from TNC about the need for co-innovation, and I think we all know that there's no technology transfer in agriculture. That it really does take these co-innovation processes to get the impact that we want. And I wanted to ask you a little bit, because there's a lot of multi-stakeholder platforms at different levels, different scales, right? I mean, at the global scale and, then that come down. But given this lack of ability to take something and replicate and copy paste, I wanted to hear a little bit about your experiences and how you work across these scales to make sure we get the contextualized measures that are needed while we get the scale that is also required.
Perfect.
And that's a really easy question.
Thanks a lot. Any other questions? So we have on the table how the multi-stakeholder platforms can help the implementation of the policy, how innovation can make inroads into the Rio Convention discussions, and a final questions about co-innovation. Yeah? Anna Maria, do you want to start? Or?
Yeah,
okay,
I can
please.
start. So thank you very much for the questions. I guess that you were asking about the future of the agricultural conversation in this framework in UFCCC. That was your first part of the question. And I guess that naturally relates to Coronivia and what it's going to happen, the decision that needs to be made in COP27 in terms of continuing Coronivia or not. And I think that Coronivia has done something really important, which is bringing the agriculture main topics into the agenda of this convention, and I think that that's really good. So the importance of thinking seriously about this, obviously this comes with a lot of challenges, but I think that things have changed from 10 years ago in terms of how the importance of thinking about food and agriculture and perhaps trying to move into food systems in the conversations that are happening here. So I think that that's really good. What has happened with Coronivia has been a lot of workshops and provision of guidelines and recommendations, and I think that this is the time to act upon those. And I know that right now the negotiators are in really interesting and exciting conversations in relation to what do they agree in terms of moving forward. But I personally, I think that it's more using what is already in place in terms of the bodies that are already constituted and try to embed those lessons learned, those guidelines that came from the workshops into different mechanisms to make this actionable. Because I think that we all agree that we are in a hurry, the time is up, so we need to really start doing things. And let me connect to the other part of your question, which is how we can connect process, which I think that it's totally relevant, the different conventions, how can we put things together? And I guess that one of the good things that came out last year from the UN Food Systems Summit was this idea of these pathways, these resilient pathways that are being implemented at the national level. And I think that this is a mechanism where, at the national level, we can include things that are coming from UNFCCC, from UNCCD, and look at this as a system. And I know that in some countries, there's already finance to implement these agendas in terms of these resilient pathways for food systems, and we should make good use of that in terms of getting things together. So perhaps I stop there because I know that we don't have much time.
Thanks a lot, Ana Maria.
I'm very happy to tackle the first question. So that was a question about what can multi-stakeholder coalitions do to move food systems forward, and what do we need to see in order to take action in this space, thinking about COP27 coming up. I'm going to tackle it a little bit more from a kind of active on the ground solutions angle. And I think one thing we've heard a lot about, the framing today wasn't about adaptation. And we're absolutely aware that we have to adapt to climate change. We're baking in 1.5 degree of climate change. And we're seeing the severe consequences of that already, and they're going to exacerbate. But we also then have separate conversations very much on climate mitigation. And that is the angle which predominantly businesses engaged in at the moment through all of the net zero commitments. And what I would really like to see to accelerate action in this space is actually for us to much more explicitly recognize we need to do both together. And what we need to be doing in order to solve this is finding what are the win-win solutions that deliver for climate mitigation and deliver for climate adaptation in a simultaneous manner. And I think that that's a really, talking about multi-stakeholder coalitions and their role today, I think that's a really important conversation to have between businesses and farmers, so that we can understand what are the adaptation needs and the resiliency needs of farmers who are managing land and the impacts they're seeing. But what are the simultaneous needs that business have to generate resilient supply chains and also to reduce their carbon emissions, to also reduce the future impact of climate change on farming systems. And so I think if we can get together and identify what are some of these win-wins that match the agenda of these two key stakeholders, I think that is a critical ask moving forwards. I think as well, in terms of what can we do moving forwards, we saw at COP26, actually, we came back as WBCSD from COP26, and we came back with the summary or the take home that business and the private sector is moving faster than policymakers at the moment. And they're making quite significant commitments and want to see greater ambition and acceleration from policymakers more broadly. And I think we're getting to the position where, I think that if we can get businesses to be demonstrating what they're doing, and then to start advocating to policymakers in terms of we need to get this moving faster, I think that's one way that we can start accelerating the system. So I'm really pleased to see the elevated role that non-state actors have in these UN processes. I think that's critical.
Thanks a lot, James. And Gilson?
Yeah, hello. Thank you for the word again. So very rapidly here, yes, I think the thing that have to be now in focus is really those practical tools to enhance resilience. And I believe crop insurance and agricultural insurance is one of those tools that should be in focus in the future. So to raise international awareness about the importance of agricultural insurance would be one of the points to bring for future discussions in this framework. So this is what I have to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Gilson. And Rob, perhaps some comments on co-innovation.
Yes, very quickly. I think it's a great question, and I'm going to talk about it in a geographical sense, although, of course, sometimes we work with companies and other institutions that cut vertically or in another way. But we try to be engaged in thinking about agricultural sustainability at multiple levels, right? So understanding at a planetary level, planetary boundaries, and what sustainability looks like at that global level, and how we feed the world's population while achieving all these big goals of the SDGs and the international treaties. And then, at a national level, we often, there's stakeholders at that level in the US or in Brazil or in that specific context. And I would say both at the global and national level, maybe there are representatives of farmers or producers in those conversations, but it is a different level of conversation. And then we have on-the-ground projects, maybe to simplify a bit, where we're directly co-developing tools and ways to adapt to climate change with producers. And I think, in each case, the people in the room depend on the goals of that community and what you're trying to do together. And I guess the last point I want to make here, while I have the floor, is that I see a real need to. It's great that we might work in a place like Arkansas on water efficiency, or in the Cerrado on soy, but there are many, many billions of people, right, farming and in the agricultural system, and if we're asking them to adapt to climate change, there's going to be a real need for more and more people who are almost like agricultural extension agents, right? Helping those communities do that. And that's not going to be a role that NGOs can play. That has to be a role probably for national governments to play. And this, in a way, is cutting against... Perhaps. Sorry, I will finish up in 1 second. It's cutting against a bit the tendency over time to reduce capacity in sort of agricultural extension services. So I think that's important to also talk about. It's not an exciting, sexy topic, but what is our capacity to inform farmers at the national level, and how do we support that?
Fantastic, Bob. Thanks a lot, Rob. And on this element, the practicality of information and support for farmers, and on the other element, at the opposite, the need also to push innovation into the Rio Convention discussions. I mean, I want to really thank you for participating into our event, and thank you again, Giulia Di Tommaso, Anna Maria Lobo Guerrero, Marilik Nijmeier, Anne Vogue, James Smith, Gilson Martins, and Rob McDonald for sharing a lot of great insights with us. Thanks a lot, and I hope that you enjoy the event. Thank you.